as the listener to this can hear, I'm going to be talking about what I've come to label as universal human needs. And there's a sour principle involved with this. There are actually four needs I'll be talking about, and all of us are endowed with each one of them. However, the importance of them and the quantity with which we're endowed varies from person to person. So no two people coming together have the same fingerprint of needs and with the same intensity. And that means all of us, if we try to couple with anybody, are basically incompatible with the person we're trying to couple with. There's no perfect fit available anywhere in the world. The statistics against it would be enormous. Therefore, work has to go forward. How do we contain, deal with, and make place for the disparities that are between us with regard to these very significant matters? So let me go through the significant matters now one at a time with for whatever time it takes me to do a reasonable review and give it's now going to be the reader of this some feeling for what I'm talking about. Maybe it's because I'm a man. And in most cultures, this gets laid on us with greater intensity. The first human need is productivity. We are endowed with a variety of capacities to undertake a variety of different kinds of tasks. And there is a concept known in developmental psychology in Germany during the 30s. It's called function pleasure. To actually use our equipment in ways that have some meaning or lead to some good outcome is intrinsically very, very pleasurable. And we need to do this with some period of each of our weeks. We need to be doing something that we get some good feedback from our efforts for. It can be simple things like repairing screen doors. It could be important things like quieting a very discomforted child who's in great distress and finding ways to soothe and comfort the child. But every time we rise to a challenge, make use of what we learned about the world and make use of our own particular endowments, then we get a special kind of pleasure from that. And it's very important we're organized that this be a powerful motivator for us because it drives us forward in attacking the issues we have to attack and in overcoming the obstacles we have to get over. I'll give you an example of a discrepancy in the importance of productivity in a marriage. It was, unfortunately, and has been my own marriage. I was cursed when I was born. I was what I've described in some of my presentations. I was a restitution child. My mother had had an abortion, was driven by terrible guilt at having taken a human life, and was told by a psychiatrist that she had to make restitution by having another child to replace the one who she aborted. And I am the restitution child. Her decision, I believe, was a mistake from her point of view. It did not make things better for her to get pregnant and give birth to me. As a matter of fact, she had a terrible postpartum break after my birth and demonstrating, I think, the wisdom of the two children were quite enough. And she shouldn't push herself that way just because my father wanted a son and she had had two girls. So she was miserable for the first 3 years of my life. And one day, I went in to try to entertain her. In the morning, I brought her some toy I was playing with. I wanted to talk to her, and she yelled at me, "Leave me alone. You see how miserable I am? It's all your fault." And that really was a life determining experience for me to tell me that my birth was a mistake, that I was the one who was making her miserable. I was ruining her life. Uh, it could have devastated me in one way, but it just made horrible problems in a different way. It could have made me decide to be depressed, suicidal, and to give up on life for the rest of my life. I didn't take that route. I went the other route. I was going to prove that I was not a mistake. And I developed almost from the time I went to kindergarten. I had a driven need to prove that I was bright, that I was capable, that I could do worthwhile things, and that I could make a difference in the world that could be important. And it was as if I was yelling in front of my mother, look at me, look at me, look at me, take pleasure from me. Do you see how well I'm doing? Do you see that my friends love me? Do you see my teachers love me? Do you see I'm productive and doing well in school? But she never paid attention. It didn't matter. The drivenness is in me. I can never do enough. Always, if there's somebody talks about an interesting challenge, I want to volunteer and go immerse myself in it. If a client shows up that nobody wants to work with, I have to work with that client. I have to be the miracle worker, the one who overcomes all obstacles. And I have a cancer of the productivity. Uh, Unfortunately, this has not been easy for my poor wife. And it manifested itself in a very pernicious way from her perspective. I soon learned as I moved out beyond my practice and began to engage in the politics of my profession, volunteering many hours for various organizations and doing things that felt very important to me with that because it was early in the birth of the profession I belonged to. And I was one of the ones who was scripting the labor pains and trying to be a good midwife, trying to bring a meaningful and vibrant profession into the existence for the benefit of students who wanted to join this profession and for the benefit of the lay public who needed all kinds of services. And I was very successful in a variety of ways. I got elected to so many posts and positions, elected positions. I got picked to be on so many boards and commissions and committees that were working on this, that, and the other thing. I was lobbying in Congress for bills in the federal legislature. I was really a very important person in the history of creating this profession. I became the dean of a professional school of all things, something I had never even imagined when I had been a kid. I was going to make important and significant things happen, and I was going to change a large number, a huge number of lives in the process for the better. My poor wife and my children were the ones who paid the consequences, the worst consequences, because most of the work I did was in Washington, D.C., and I was scheduled to go almost every sixth weekend for a long 3-day weekend. So many times a year, I was flying to Washington, and I was starting not to be home at children's birthdays, at anniversaries, at Valentine's Day. I just had meetings to go to, and I felt terrible. I could see the pain in the faces of the people I was abandoning and the disappointments that I wouldn't be around at significant and ritualized important moments in the lives of families and couples and individuals. But I was doing important work. So I would get a little bit tearful. I would hug my wife and say, I understood her pain. I didn't blame her for it, but I just had to set my priorities. And unfortunately, I was significant, I was needed, and there was an important agenda I had to attend to in Washington, and I was going to hurt her yet again. I did that. I did that for almost 30 years. And I think I finally came to my senses later in life. But for the first 30 years of my life, she had to constantly accommodate herself to me, who had this cancer of productivity. I had to achieve superb goals, and I had to be not an important person necessarily, but a person who actually made important things happen, or things that I would label as important things. Now, in retrospect, much of what I did that 30 years, I don't give a damn about anymore. And I lament the lost time and the times I was absent. I would have preferred to be here on Valentine's Day in retrospect. I certainly didn't feel that way at the time. So this is a good example of two people endowed with different degrees of importance of the matter of productivity. My wife certainly takes favor out of being productive, but that's not at the top of her list of those four things. Probably the one that's at the top of the list is the next one I'm going to talk about, intimacy. She wants to be available for human relationships, which we all need to do. And that's much higher on her hierarchy than my need to be productive. I could not talk to anybody for weeks if I was on a very productive project that was nourishing me. She couldn't do that. So we are badly matched in that way, and it caused us pain over the years. We lived with the pain. We made accommodations to it. There was so much that was wonderful otherwise that we lived with our disappointments. But to say we weren't disappointed would be to make a lie. So every couple has to go through what I'm describing. What are the accommodations that need to be made? And I think that I'm not quite finished with productivity yet. I talked about my personal struggle with productivity, but uh, I want to give homage to and compassion, if I can, to so many of my fellow human beings. Because if I think there's a mistake in valuing productivity too strongly, most cultures ask men to do that. Most cultures ask men to put productivity ahead of all other things. The male is supposed to be the provider and the protector in the scripts that are written by many, many, many cultures. And other things, peace of mind, comfort, ease, graciousness, human contact, whatever else is on the list, that must take second place to being the best provider possible. Uh, it is traditional male socialization. It certainly is in most of the branches of the cultures that live in the United States, and certainly many foreign countries. The male is the powerful leader and provider. My sour comment is, and that's why we die 7 years younger on the average, because that's the assignment that's made to us. I have another family to talk about it in addition to my own. I am currently doing family therapy with a very troubled family who has a 70-year-old boy that lives terribly. He is habituated to many drugs. He's screwing up his education. He has friends that are in gangs. He is making a variety of poor choices. He's extremely rebellious. He's saying no all the time. He fights against what his parents would like him to do to participate as a member of the household. And he is a handful. Well, the father in this house comes from a very traditional Italian family. And he is cursed also with the cancer of productivity. He is just about, until fairly recently, when both of his children started to reverberate with troubled lives, he has just about been absent. He works long hours. When he gets home, he has a wood shop and a gym in the garage. He takes a quick meal with the family, just grabs his food, sometimes takes it out to the garage with him, and he works out in the garage after work, or he's working on woodworking projects. It's very clear there's a division of labors. He has next to no responsibility for interacting with his children. Not only his family warmth and intimacy fairly missing between the two adults, but he doesn't enjoy much with his children either. His wife has been delegated the responsibility to be the on-point person if the children need an adult to talk to. And she's supposed to settle their difficulties, soothe them, and figure out what they're supposed to be doing to move on towards adulthood. And that's a lot of work for me too, to try and what is it, the oil tanker. If you want to turn an oil tanker, it has to go miles in the same direction before it begins to turn. I feel that way struggling with him. All right, I will take a breath. I've said what I need to say, I think, about productivity. Let me move on. And by the way, I'm presenting these in no particular order of importance. Each of us arrives at an order of importance for them, but I'm not necessarily saying this is what the order should be. The second one that occurs to me, because it's the one that got damaged by the first one, is intimacy. We are, after all, pack animals. We need human interaction with other human beings. We don't do well as hermits. If we tried to hermit ourselves completely, all but a few of us would get very miserable very quickly. As a matter of fact, the UN has declared that solitary confinement is a torture that's not to be given to people. So We vary vastly, however, in how much human contact we get. Uh, by and large, if you believe in biological destiny, I do believe that this is more than cultural. I believe that women as a human species, as a subhuman species, do carry a greater bent and a greater need for human interaction. I think it's part of the equipment born into them that helps them with the nurturing challenge when they have to accept responsibility for an infant. They really have to subordinate their own personal needs or their needs for solitude or privacy or productivity in any other way, because that tiny thing is totally dependent on them for survival. And great selflessness has to be engaged in. So I think women are partly oriented by biology to be more accessible to, more interested in, and to be more responsive to human connectedness than men are. We have to overcome barriers to get there. They flow there more naturally, and they get troubled with us because we don't join them on that playing field as easily or as often as they would like to have the companionship. My wife is certainly built that way. The next important human need that needs to be taken care of is all of us do need some solitude. It's almost like needing sleep. We need time when we disconnect from our ordinary activities and interactions to replenish ourselves and to nourish ourselves. But I am talking about real solitude and not just detachment from interacting with other human beings. Real solitude is unscheduled. We don't stop having human interaction and then go watch movies on a screen or watch comedians performing and have pseudo reactions with false people. Solitude means sitting in the oneness with oneself. That's how I consider it. Not fixing on distractions, not fixing on technological representations of human beings, but simply paying attention to what rises in us. So that's what I consider real solitude. And for many, many people, entering real solitude is very threatening. Uh, Real solitude threatens, how can I put it? I'll scratch that sentence. Freud was wise enough to give up trying to use hypnosis to heal human beings. He had come to the conclusion that there were thoughts we weren't willing to think, memories we weren't willing to visit, experiences we had had that we don't want to remember, and that we lock a whole bunch of ourselves and our experiences away in a closet, and we don't even have access to it anymore. We put a very heavy door on it with a big lock on it, so we can't go there. He discovered he could bypass the lock on the door by using hypnosis and regressing people, asking them to go back in time and to be 3 years old again. And can they remember anything that happened when they were 3? That was very powerful for them. And in the hypnotic state, they would often come up with so-called traumatic memories. And they might get furious, they might cry, they might feel frightened. The real feelings attached to those memories would boil up along with the memories themselves. However, Freud discovered this was not a useful way to work. It was certainly interesting, and he was learning a lot about early trauma. But the benefits that seemed to happen in the sessions afterwards seemed gradually to mute and go away. Whatever were the temporary freeings up and changing that was taking place got locked down again when the client was no longer under hypnosis. And he coined the term resistance. There is a resistance in all of us to opening that door. And in order to get the door open and be able to leave it open, the resistance had to be dealt with and cope with and overcome. And the client has to surrender the resistance. Otherwise, there will not be an ongoing and dependable good outcome of the work that we try to do. So that's what Freud had discovered, because He went on to find out there was a way to do this. The way was to do what he called free association. He would sit behind the couch. He would put the client on the couch as if the client were all alone, and there would be no distractions. He would not speak for long periods of time. He would tell the client to just pay attention to what it rises in their consciousness, everything, and to speak aloud everything they were becoming aware of. Even if it seemed foolish, trivial, nonsensical, meaningless, they were not to censor anything or withhold anything. And he discovered if he could encourage them to have a willingness to do this, they were gradually opening. And the passageway from things that were out of awareness into awareness was becoming increasingly reliable, increasingly full of interesting things, and increasingly beneficial to the one who would do that. So, in a way, he was asking the client to go into a meditative state without distractions and to just experience what would rise spontaneously in him. Now, I am telling you, that feels very dangerous. Most of us flee from that. We don't want to pay attention to or have to be in the grip of, again, what is rising spontaneously in us. We want to distract ourselves. And if we take solitude for ourselves, we'll fill the solitude with distractions and not sit in real solitude. It takes great courage to indulge solitude on ourselves. And by the way, what's wonderful is this is not something that needs many, many hours a week frequently to be done. It can be done in a few idle moments a day. Just give ourselves a break and just sit quietly for 10 or 15 minutes and just pay attention to our stream of consciousness. We need to do that to nourish ourselves. So that's my third one, the third human need that needs some attention and needs some paying homage and participation with. And let me go on to the fourth. And the fourth one is erotic connection. We have been wired in such a fashion that we, as it says in the Bible, go forth and procreate, be fruitful and multiply. It's built into all of us. Unfortunately, that is a very powerful drug, and it's a very dangerous drug. Every culture has rules about who can have sex with whom when and what kind of sex they can have. There's an attempt in every culture to put some kind of brakes on the expression of just simple eroticism. And many members of many cultures try to rebel against it. Members of many cultures try to surrender and contain it. But this, I have a note about Woody Allen. One of the curses of coupling up with somebody is the amount of erotic expression, the intensity of it, and the frequency of it is always different in the two partners. And Woody Allen touches on this wonderfully in the movie Annie Hall. The two people have met each other and they're starting to have a real affair and see each other for sex frequently. And they're thinking about maybe moving in together. And then there's a split screen. Each one is in psychoanalysis and each one is talking to his or her analyst at this point. And the analyst is asking the same thing. So, what is sex like between the two of you? And Woody Allen, the man, says, well, it's pretty good. I guess it's okay. We're making love about 3 times a week. And Diane Keaton, his girlfriend, is talking to her analyst, and she says, oh, it is so wonderful. We're actually enjoying sex 3 times a week. The disconnect between the two of them is laid out very wonderfully in a funny fashion in the movie. What she's finding glorious, he's finding tolerable. And that is the curse with which we live. And so many people are damaged sexually. It's been estimated that somewhere between 10 and 15% of human marriages are asexual. There's just no sex anymore between the two. There may have been for a while, or they may never have been much of anything. and they have an aversion to coupling up erotically. Um, my colleague Aaron Berger here and I have been involved with a couple who got married. He had had very little sexual experience. He had been very traumatized growing up by a horrible family and actually physically beaten. And he left home when he was 14. He started to try and live independently. It was so terrible at home. So by nature, he doesn't want a lot of intimacy. He's rather detached. And they had sex for a while after they got married, and it went on until they had a child because he did want to become a father. That was important to him. But soon thereafter, soon after the baby arrived, and that was 8 years ago, his sexuality closed down fairly quickly, and there's been hardly any touching, even handshaking, anything of any kind, let alone sexual encounter between the two of them. And they're hard at work now, like Sisyphus, trying to learn to roll the boulder uphill again, the two of them. And I'll send them good wishes. My role in them has come to an end because I help them get ready and find a good sex therapist, and they're working with her. So they don't need me anymore. Aaron will continue to work with the man, try and be a help, whatever help and support he can give. But that's just one example of how clotted up the erotic life has become in many cultures. Uh, I'm going to Italian culture, upper class Italian culture now. There isn't much sexuality between the husband and wife, and that's not a problem. He's allowed to have a mistress as long as he's not very overt about it and doesn't bring a lot of gossip into the neighborhood. The wife is supposed to tolerate that. And there is a myth. I'm started, I guess. There is a myth. There are many myths. Women get interfered with. Women's sexuality is particularly dangerous because women can get pregnant out of wedlock, and then what happens? So women's sexuality in most cultures is crushed to some degree. The prevailing attitude is being erotic and alive to erotic thrills is not important to women. That's very masculine like. When women who do that are kind of there's something wrong with them. They got too much masculinity in them. They're sluts and they shouldn't do that. They should be demure. And what sex really is, it's a kindness that's done for men who are kind to them. If a man is attentive and wants to marry her and is decent and a good provider, then he should be rewarded occasionally when he wants sex for having been a good provider and a kind man to her. I don't know why. I get enraged when I talk about these things. This feels awful. I'm not a big fan of any culture. Every culture crushes parts of what it means to be a human being. And their descriptions of why they're crushing what they're crushing are all full of crap most of the time. Uh, I'm describing middle class America now, particularly religious middle class American women, and even worse in Catholic middle class American women, how they're raised to think about sexuality. And where was I going? Uh, Excuse me, I need to take a breath. Oh, this is an aside about sexuality itself that I will tuck in a different place when I put this chapter together. Sexuality is wonderfully expressive. It's a language of its own. It can be used to express many things. It can be used to express the passionate desire to be fully involved with the other. That's some of the most glorious sex. It can be used to make hatred. There are some people that make hate sex. They bang on the other person vigorously, and the daydream is they want to hurt them, actually. I'll show you, fuck you. They're doing an unfuck you by fucking. It's really strange. Then there's comfort sex. That's what women are encouraged to be the dispensers of. Your men are hurting, so go comfort them by responding to their desire to have sex. That's the metaphor for giving a man sex, is to be sexual with him. Uh, oh, and then there's competitive sex. I'm indebted to who? Which one of the people in humanistic existential movement did I hear? I'm having a senior moment. I forget. Rollo May. It was Rollo May. I attended a lecture and he was shaking his head. He said he despaired for Western industrial society in the United States and in Europe and other places because we had somehow managed to turn sex into a branch of work. Everybody who got into bed and started to make love worried about whether they were performing well and whether they were doing the right thing. It became something that they had to get a scorecard for. Are they really able effectively to give their partners orgasms? There's a list of things that should be done if you're doing sex properly. And yes, I remember the other thing I'm going to do. And he said, it turns into a vicious circle. It's very hard to just get in bed and have an experience if you have a template of how you're supposed to be behaving and what you're supposed to do and what the outcome is supposed to be and about how long it should take. It can't be too soon and it can't take too long. There are time intervals that are right time intervals. We've created madness. He doubted very much where prehistoric people had scales like that in their head about how to evaluate whether they were doing sex creatively and well or not. This is a terrible joke I'm going to tell. It's a joke about what happens in most marriages. Since this is a book about most marriages, I will tell this terrible joke. Brad and Irene are having their 25th wedding anniversary. And they are a very loving and kind and decent couple. They produce two nice children. He has a good law practice going. He's making a nice living. She's gone back to graduate school. She wants to study art history and she wants to become a college professor because the children are getting older. She's a very bright woman, a very lovely woman. They have good friends who enjoy them. They've traveled a lot and had interesting experiences. And they feel wonderful that they've been married for 25 years. And they want to do something to celebrate the glory of their 25th anniversary. And they decide that they like cooking together. So they're going to make a very, very delicious dinner. They'll figure out what to cook together. And then after dinner, they will go and just take they have a bathtub, big bathtub in the bathroom with jets in it. They will take a big bubble bath for 20 minutes or so. And then she bought a new nightgown for him and they're going to get in bed. And they're going to have sex and then go to bed around about midnight. So they made the dinner and they're laughing and giggling and toying with each other and flirting and having a great time. The dinner is superb. They have a wonderful champagne. They get undressed and get the bubble bath. And then she puts the negligee on. He comes to bed naked and they start gently caressing each other and it gets more and more intense and more passionate. And he finally decides to screw her from behind for whatever reason. And they're very vigorously into the act of pumping and pumping and pumping, and they're pumping and pumping and pumping, but nobody's having an orgasm. And they keep pumping and pumping. And he's panting. He's getting so tired. He doesn't know how much longer he can go on doing this. And she's panting too, but they're panting with oxygen deprivation and fatigue, not with glorious passion. And finally, he rolls away from her and he shakes his head. He says, "What's the matter? Can't you think of anybody else either?" That's a terrible, bitter joke. It implies that there's no way to keep a relationship vital for many, many years. And the only way to keep it going as if one or the other or both of them are unfaithful, not unfaithful in reality, unfaithful in some daydreams, maybe in masturbatory fantasies, or even unfaithful at the moment that they're supposed to be coupling with each other, daydreaming about somebody else instead. That's the only way that marriage is going to endure. I don't believe that that's true, but I would imagine that that's not an uncommonly held belief. So, another story, a clinical story. My partner, when I was early in practice, one of my partners was named Daniel Golden. Of all things, Daniel Golden had a client who was a nun. The the church was paying for her care because she was a particularly very devoted nun, and she did so many things that were good for people. And she had gotten quite depressed. She was in her late 20s and nobody could figure out what was wrong. She fought as hard as she could to overcome her depression and to get to work, but it wasn't happening. She was wanting to stay in bed more and more. So Dan was working with her, and he was audacious. He took a chance. He tried to interview her about what role, if any, sexuality had played in her life. And she was shocked and she was outraged. She didn't leave therapy, fortunately. She just told him she had never had anything to do with sex and she had no desire to have anything to do with sex. And she had never masturbated. She had never had anything that felt vaguely sexual with another human being, male or female. And she saved herself. She was saving herself for her love for Jesus. But as they got to know each other and as she began to trust him more, she was crying one day, but she was much livelier, much more animated than she had been. And she looked like she wanted to talk about something, but she didn't know if she had the courage to. So she finally talked to him and she said, I've been having terrible thoughts. I go to confession and I have to atone for my terrible thoughts, but I can't seem to figure out how to stop my terrible thoughts. And Dan asked if she would have a willingness to, since she told the priest what were her terrible thoughts. And she said, I imagine putting my hand in my crotch and rubbing myself. And I begin, when I think about it, I begin to have kind of I can't even describe what kind of feelings. They're kind of creepy, exciting feelings happen to me. And I stop it immediately. And Dan thanked her for telling him. And he said, I know that this is not Catholic to do, but would you have the willingness to actually try what you're daydreaming about and see if you could manage to do that? Oh, and she said, no, I could never do that. So they had a big discussion going back and forth about whether she could or could not do that. And she finally screwed up the courage. And again, it felt really good, but it felt horrible. And now she had much greater penance to do when she told the priest about it. But I'll just cut to the chase. He saw her for 2 more years. And one day she came in smiling. And what she was smiling about, the bathtub in the public bathroom where she bathed in the morning had one of those handheld showers. And she took the shower and she just sprayed the shower on her clitoris. And she writhed back and forth, spraying the shower on her clitoris. And she had an orgasm for the first time in her life. And she was shocked. She was overcome. She was being transported by her body, vibrating and doing things to her she never knew it was capable of doing. And now she was in real trouble with the church, and she began to talk to him about leaving the church. And as if what she had discovered was so important to her, she wanted to continue the explorations. So that's an extreme example of what we do to crush women's sexuality. Oh, no, there's an even more extreme example. In many Arab countries, they cut off women's clitorises. So they take away one of the most powerful pleasure points in a woman and make it less likely that she's going to stray and want to be sexual. Oh, God almighty. why is sexuality so hard and so complicated? Uh, and we have still such shame about it. Even in a supposedly advanced and liberated culture, we have shame. There are very few married couples that will discuss whether or not they masturbate with each other, and certainly not what is the daydream they're having when they're masturbating. They don't feel safe enough, even with their own spouses, to be real and to open up a door to one of the rooms of their consciousness. That's how terrible we are, and how short of where we need to be that we still sit in the year 2022. Well, the journey to sexual participation is a really hard one in our culture. To begin with, still, and I would gather what were the majority of families in this culture, young children moving towards puberty are given little or no instruction about what's going to happen to their body and about what adult sexuality, which is oncoming in a few years, is going to be like. There's a big void of knowledge. The school system in some place tries to make up for some of that. There are sex education classes with parents' permission, but that's not how it should be taught. It should be taught in a warm, loving family, and that doesn't happen most of the time. Uh, Certainly didn't happen in my generation at all with anybody I know, and we were very ill prepared for moving onward. I myself, I think, had my first wet dream when I was 12. Up until that time, I had had the beginnings of erotic dreams. I dreamed of being with female peers that I knew in school, and in my dream, I would hug them or I would kiss them. And sometimes we would play wedding, the kids in the neighborhood would, and we would try on what it was like to be father and to be mother, with a little bit of touching going on, not much. And I went from that one night I was sleeping and having the same variation of a dream. Little girl I knew in school, and I was giving her a kiss, and suddenly my loins were vibrating and something was squirting out of my penis. And I thought, oh my God, I'm sick. What's wrong? What's happening to me? I have to go to the hospital. Something dangerous and overwhelming was taking place. Uh, Nobody told me about it. I didn't discuss it with anybody. I just grit my teeth and live with it. When I had soiled pajamas because I had wet them in the night, I would put them in the garbage. I would hide them. I would throw them away. I would stuff them anywhere where they wouldn't be found. I felt I was full of shame and guilt. Don't ask me. Oh, I started to say, don't ask me why I was full of shame and guilt. I now know, as I think, the answer came to me. I don't have conscious memories of this, but I am sure I did what most young people do around the ages 2, 3, 4. When I was unhappy about something, I'm sure one of my hands went down on my crotch and I would rub my genitalia a little bit. That was some sucking, and other things I was doing was probably one of them. I'm sure from what followed that I was interfered with, that I was told to stop it. I may have even had my hand slapped when I was doing that. I was getting clear messages. You do not reach for your genitals when you need some kind of comfort. That's not something that's tolerated. How do I know that? Because I developed a very strange habit. It blended two things. As Freud said, symptoms are overdetermined. It's not one simple thing that causes them. In my case, it was two. One was loneliness. I lived in a household where hardly anybody paid much attention to me. And the other was I was not supposed to touch my genitals. So I had been thumb sucking a lot. That had been my preferred way of comforting myself. That one finally got interfered with when I went to first grade. I got shamed so badly for thumb sucking, I gave it up. So, what did I hit upon? I rocked myself to sleep every night. That's how I comforted myself. I couldn't fall asleep unless I rocked for 10 or 15 minutes back and forth. but I had to rock in a particular way. My butt had to be lying on top of both my hands. So my hands were pinned against the bed by my butt. That way, I now know I wouldn't be tempted to take my hand out and touch my genitals. I would only rock. So I was stopping touching my genitals as a way of comforting myself and rocking back and forth to myself to sleep. And that I was so ashamed. That didn't stop until I was 12 and started to go do overnights in other kids' houses. I couldn't imagine the teasing I would get for rocking myself to sleep at night. But it was a fight. I'll go forward. As I went forward into adolescence, it was a fight to allow myself to masturbate. I was in my 20s before I started masturbating. I hit upon a device when I was around 16. I started experimenting with women's bodies finally, and we would have makeout sessions. And I had no objection if the young woman masturbated me, but I wouldn't touch myself. I had to get over that hill on my own. It was so shame. And besides that, I don't know why young men do this bullshit. We'd be in the locker room after PE and we would tease each other. I bet you go home and whack off, as if that was an insult. That was not something you were supposed to do. That's disgusting. You're a pervert if you do it. Everybody was doing it, and everybody was teasing everybody else was for doing it. And I thought everybody was not doing it. I believed the teasing. I believed they were upright, and I was struggling with impulses to do it, and I was never going to do it. I didn't want to get teased for whacking off. How disgusting whacking off was. And if you think what I went through as a male is something, God, what women go through is even 1,000 times worse. I think most young women in this culture still grow up and reach adulthood without ever having touched themselves trying to please themselves. Research I've seen suggests that women's masturbation starts to flourish in the late 20s. It takes that long to overcome the repression that's been laid on them and the interference with them becoming masters of their own sexuality. So the climbing up the mountain is hard for both males and females, and much worse for females. It goes in stages. I mentioned the first stage, erotic dreams, and then wet dreams. And then there is the beginning of spilling over from autoerotic activity just with oneself, by and for oneself, into actually starting trying to make things happen with members of the sex that can be the sex that's arousing for you. If you're gay, oh, that's an extra added burden. You have to overcome the stigma of gayness to begin to proceed higher up on the mountain. For those of us that are heterosexual, we're at least allowed to proceed. We're allowed to start going to boy-girl parties when our late elementary school and on into junior high school. We're allowed, maybe if we do it secretly, and we're allowed to start playing kissing games. We're allowed to start interacting with each other some. And on the school ground is full of crushes. We fall into some kind of enamored state looking at somebody across the playground, and we think about how wonderful they are. We giggle and talk to our friends that she's wonderful, and I wish I could spend time alone with her, but we swear everybody to secrecy. We never approach that person. We don't actually talk to them. We're too shy and too frightened to go make anything happen. We just yearn for them at a distance. Or we fall in love with a screen idol. That's a good one too. We can have all kinds of loving butterflies in the stomach looking at somebody on the screen because that's never going to go anywhere. And we're quite safe to explore what it's like to feel that way about somebody. Towards middle adolescence, actual contact starts being made. We walk up to the person we have a crush on. Do we say, "You're really a wonderful person"? Hell no. We tease her. We say something sarcastic to her. We pinch her. We express our interest in her with a negative sign before it. We make ourselves obnoxious so she doesn't want to respond to us. And that helps keep us safe for a while longer. Nothing real is going to happen. She thinks we're a pest and she doesn't want any part of us. And she complains about us to her girlfriends. By middle adolescence, we get beyond that. We actually start the beginnings of courtship behavior. We start going to parties, coeducational parties, and we start taking off the object of our desire to have a private conversation in the corner. We start making out, starting to grope them a little bit. We get in with them in the movie theater and put our arm around them, and we want to see, can we let our arm slide down next to them and reach down lower on them a little bit? Will they put up with that? There's a testing going on. How intimate can we get? And by the end of high school, it's turned into more of the fullness of thing. I think the statistics are something like 68% of males graduating high school have completed at least one act of fairly complete intercourse with somebody they want to be sexual with, and it's something like 48% of the females have. So the females are still lagging behind. Actually, by that time, males are beginning to be under social pressure to conquer. They get teased. How many girls have you slept with by this time? There's a kind of knighthood if you have a large number. Then you're a special person because you have seduced a large number of women. That's the destiny of this work that you've been doing, is to be a great seducer. What crazy images we pour into kids, or when we hear crazy images, how we don't try to bend them or turn them in a different direction. Truth of the matter is that males are really scared to become very attached to and to surrender fully to young women. They fight against it much longer than women do the other way around. And that too is a cultural artifact. For better or worse, most of the attending to children in this culture and in most other cultures is done by women. Fathers are always a more austere, more powerful, more frightening, and more distant figure. But it's the woman who actually does most of the work of teaching, training, disciplining. Father does horrible disciplining if the child's really done something terrible, but mother does the everyday disciplining. So our biological destiny, if we're heterosexual, is a very challenging one. We're supposed to grow up, take our life in our own hands, put our mother to one side, give up being scripted by her and block her if she continues to try and script us, and to become the architects of our own existence. And at the same time, we're supposed to surrender to some junior version of our mothers and allow her to have at least reasonable power over us. And most men fight against that all the years of their life. They will never empower their wives. They will never let their wives fully influence them. If push comes to shove, and this is a topic for another chapter, they have to have the right to make the final decision. They will not fully share power with their partner. Okay, is there anything more? No, I think I've covered my agenda a little bit early. So that is it. No, it isn't, because the title of the, thank you. I know something was missing. The title of the chapter is The Need for Human Warmth. And I open by saying we have to we have to learn to negotiate the differences between the two of us. So many hours of conversation are going to be had between two partners about these four topics. How do we manage productivity? How much productivity can you engage in apart from me? And how high on your agenda of what to do can that be without my feeling like you're abandoning me and I can't stand it? And I don't want to be with somebody who's so self-preoccupied with what he wants to do in the world and so under preoccupied with who I am, how he can take pleasure from me. And if we have children, what the children need from him and so on. Those are some of the arguments that go on. Sometimes, interestingly enough, it's the woman who's the star or the entrepreneur, or she's out in some power position in the culture that fits her needs. And it's the man that's hurting at home, wanting to keep the home fires burning and being the advocate of intimacy between the two of them. That is the second theme, having warm, rich experiences that are shared and precious conversation that are savored by the both of them, having a sufficiency of those to meet one's basic needs, and the level that basic needs is different in the two partners. having enough solitude to replenish oneself and pay attention to one's quiet inner voice that is often nagging and unattended to. And finally, managing the flow of the erotic life that the two of them share and doing it in a way that neither one of them probably gets everything all the time, but each of them has enough individual experiences of great love on that occasion that when it's clunky or isn't happening, they can wait until the next time the great love comes back. I often use a metaphor with couples. When you're in courtship, you're often overextending yourself. And it's like high tide and a full moon. The waves are crashing up on the beach over and over again. And you're struggling to build something. But after a while, the moon goes into full moon and the tide changes. And now the waves come up on the beach only occasionally. If you have a good relationship, they will keep returning over and over again. The frequency will never be like what it was in the beginning when you were building a relationship, but don't despair. It doesn't mean you're falling out of love or that your relationship is dying if it's going back into what's more natural for human beings as they live together. All right, I think I will stop there. I got plenty of raw material. If I organize this chapter, it'll be a good one.
Arthur, I want to make a comment or a question regarding productivity. I too suffer from productivity.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if there's a hierarchy in terms of like productivity. It's like if we're saving lives, that's very productive. If
Oh, sure. It gives us all the more reason to get lost in it. It's clearer and clearer what good purposes exist.
and then we obviously can be very productive with our families or with our houses or with our kind of like tasks at hand.
Oh,
And
tell me what
so,
you mean. Wait, before you go on too much further, what did you mean by productive with our family?
well, in terms of all the things that you have to do for your children or your extended family, your parents, or kind of like all.
That's not on my list of being productive. Being productive are the pursuit of personally held things that bring intrinsic pleasure to the self. Those are things of service, of altruism, of kindness to others, and that's a whole different bag as far as I'm concerned.
So then when your wife gives you a list of 14 different things that you have to do in the course of the weekend, is that not considered productive?
No, not by
Oh,
me.
oh,
That's
okay.
not
All right.
under my label of productive. My first response is,
Okay, all right.
why can't the bitch go and take care of that? Why is she nagging at me?
Okay, all right. So then you've answered my question.
Things are certainly produced. Supplies are produced in the pantry and for the refrigerator, and the laundry is taken to the dry cleaners. And yes, the things are being produced, but those are not the kinds of things I have a personal investment on. Those kinds of things don't nourish my soul to be engaged in.
Okay, but then your wife will be very happy with you.
Yeah, and I do a lot of crap that makes her happy. She's on my agenda. I need to please her.
Mhm.
We have worked out what the balance is now, and I do many things to please her that I probably wouldn't pay any attention to if I weren't married to her. And it
Okay.
does give me pleasure to please her.
Okay, but that's not productive.
That's not productive.
Okay, all right.
Productive is some kind of achievement, some kind of difference out in the world.
Okay,
That's how I'm using the word.
all right. Okay.
I guess I struggle with trying to be productive.
Do you? You don't need very much.
No.
I envy you. I'm so
Yeah.
driven.
Yeah, me too.
You mean you could lie on a beach with a Mai Tai for days on end?
Yeah, I believe I could. Yeah, there's a certain existential reality that I know that I do what I can, but I
Mhm.
give myself credit for waking up in the morning.
Yeah. I'd probably have to start watching YouTube presentations of theoretical physics. I'd have to come off the beach and go to the bedroom and turn the TV on.
Yeah.
because
do think
learning about things I'm interested in is one of the things that makes me feel productive.
Hmm.
And that's
I
a
do that.
solitary thing.
Yeah, that I do a lot. That I do a lot.
Even
think
though
it
it
is.
doesn't affect anybody else?
Yeah,
Okay.
because one day it might. It's raw
Hmm.
material. I might get a chance to use it.
Oh yeah, that stuff filters into all my therapy sessions. I start talking about the block universe and time and space existing all at once. And so, whatever choice you make, it's kind of already been made anyway. So don't worry so much.
That's right.
Mhm.
I have a nagging feeling that there is another something I should be saying, but I can't identify it. Damn. All right. When I finally see this episode or get a transcript of it, I'll know what's missing and I'll know how to fix it.
Yeah.
Thank you for putting up with me. I was talking so fast. I had so many things to say today.
That's important. It's important information.
All right. Have a good week. I will see you
Okay.
next Thursday in our group.
You too.
right.
All right. Be
Bye.
well.
Bye.
Bye.